Welcome to another episode of the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour podcast with your host, Andrew Langer.
Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Federal Newswire's Lunch Hour podcast. I'm Andrew Langer, your host, and if you haven't checked it out yet, we now have a new Twitter handle, X handle, at Lunch Hour Pod. You can find all of the work that we're doing, including the clips of our shows there. If you're listening to us on one of the many fine podcast platforms, you can always check out what's going on in studio with our YouTube channel. If you are watching us on YouTube, you can take us with you wherever you go by finding us on whatever fine podcast platform that you're finding your fine podcast content. Go and check us out there. Leave a or hit the subscribe button, leave a like, leave a comment, and let your friends and family members know. Now, normally, I edit down bios. I'm going to embarrass our guest today because I got to read his bio in its entirety. Our guest today is Joe Luppino-Esposito. He is the Federal Policy Director at the Pacific Legal Foundation, where he develops solutions and advocates for reforms for states and the federal government. This is why I got to read this. He joined PLF to connect with others who want to fight government overreach and defend individual liberty. He learned that the risk in pushing hard in service of more liberty for more people is worth the reward. I could not agree more with that. It's resulted in bills becoming law, schoolhouse rock style, and regulations finalized or canceled. Executive orders, SNL schoolhouse rock style, and regulations finalized or canceled, no one's preferred style of government, plus a few vetoes, pardons, and headlines along the way. See, I butchered it. I should have practiced it before I came on. Prior to PLF, he was the director of rule of law initiatives at the Due Process Institute. We've had folks from DPI on, working on bipartisan criminal justice reform in Congress, and was directly involved in the passage of the First Step Act, as well as going to the signing ceremony involved. Prior to that, he worked at the Right on Crime initiative at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. He also previously served as a visiting fellow for overcriminalization at the Heritage Foundation. I remember when that project was in its infant stages. He's worked on state policy issues, including public pensions, federalism, healthcare, and labor law. He's a native of New Jersey. We will ask him what exit. He earned a JD from Seton Hall University School of Law in Newark and served as editor-in-chief of the Circuit Review Law Journal. He earned a BA in Government and American Studies at the College of William and Mary. We're very familiar with that institution. In fact, maybe that's where hold on, Joe. I'm going to interrupt myself. I know I'm 3 minutes into this. I haven't let you say anything. But I'm going to ask you about your outside interests at the end. I know that's the last paragraph of your bio. Maybe I should just do a William and Mary alumni focused podcast, because I think that would be fun. That would be good. Yeah. Including talking about my William and Mary classmate who was the murderer, alleged murderer. I'm sorry, can't say that. Knock wood.
Of course,
alleged murderer. Sorry. Yes, I knew those guys. Joe and his wife, Amanda, plus their 2 kids and 2 cats, Reagan and Jack Bauer, live in Western Loudoun County, Virginia, which is a key part of Joe's attempt to be the most outside the Beltway insider in Washington. So you have to move back to Williamsburg to get that, Joe. He gets overly involved in his community, from his kids' school to local politics to the Homeowners Association. The last vestige of petty tyranny left in America, Joe, is the Homeowners Association. In fact, actually, let me start here with that. Mm-hmm. So when I was teaching on the regulatory process at William and Mary, I saved one moment towards the end of the semester, and I said to my students, this is going to be the most important 15 minutes of any class you're ever going to take at William and Mary, because today we're going to talk about homeowners associations. Let's start there before we get into PLF and the new issues of PLF.
Yeah.
How maddening do you drive your fellow homeowners association people? Because you're not just a lawyer, but you're a lawyer working for one of the preeminent property rights nonprofit law firms in America.
Yeah, it was always a tough balance, because there are some people that join the HOA because they like it and they like the idea that someone's going to be controlling other people's property. And there's people like me that join it to make sure that those people don't run the HOA. So that's always was my focus when I was leading the board, to say that, look, just because your neighbor is putting up something you don't like, unless it's against some of these archaic rules that have been on the books here, we're not going to stop it. So it did drive some folks a little crazy. Other folks didn't want anything at all. But, we've tried to do the bare minimum of the garbage service and the snow plows and get things done that way.
But it really is amazing, right? When we're talking about regulation and different models of regulation, this concept of the Homeowners Association, which is voluntary insofar as, you buy into it and your codicils are laid out in your mortgage documentation, et cetera, et cetera. It has enormous power, but it really does show you the possibilities of sort of affecting change in the most local of circumstances, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really interesting to see, even some people's reactions to what things should or should not be done. In Virginia, we have that most of the roads are state-run roads. So unless they were a road that was specifically a private road for the HOA, that's going to be handled by the state to do their snow plowing and everything else. So then you have these very obvious problems when they come complaining to me or somebody else on the board to say, why didn't you plow my street? Like, well, no, you have to call somebody else. And well, since you're in the northern half of the neighborhood, that's actually the office that's in that town. And if you're in the southern half of the neighborhood, it's in the other town. So people very quickly got used to how local government worked and how even the state government at that localized level worked, because, sometimes we had to pass the buck because we literally had nothing to do with it. Other times it was on us and we could fix it. So
where do you
got people engaged?
Where do you come down on this issue? So I lived in Crofton, Maryland for a couple of years, literally a couple of years. And we had a house that had essentially there was the larger neighborhood, and then there was the smaller sort of government around our individual subdivision part of the larger neighborhood. And we actually had two different property management companies. Where do you come down on this idea of outsourcing the management of the HOA to property management companies?
So it's helpful in a lot of ways. I mean, it really depends on the size.
Right.
We have, there are smaller ones I've been in where they have a property management company. They basically just collect the checks and make sure your books are in order, and that's that. But otherwise, it's kind of difficult because it could become, in a lot of cases, and some, frankly, out in Loudoun County, are essentially more like real towns and cities. They have this sort of outrageous reach and impact just because there's, like tens of thousands of residents and tens of thousands of homes. So it's difficult in that the day-to-day people, unless you're getting paid a salary, aren't going to be able to actually manage the town, essentially.
Right.
So you need somebody to do it, but you really need to actually keep an eye on what they're doing.
Well, this is what I'm getting
and review their work.
Let me tie this into the work that you've done on crime and the right on crime stuff, the stuff you did down in Texas, right? Because we know that when you start to incentivize enforcement, you put some kind of monetary incentive on an agency, right? When you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So I moved to a neighborhood out on the Eastern Shore. I lived on the Eastern Shore for 10 years. And we lived in the section of the subdivision that had no HOA, and we had somebody who wanted to put one in. But it quickly became clear, in the other parts of the neighborhood where there was the HOA and they had a management company, that the management company was just out there because they made money every time they find somebody. That's a problem, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, that's a big problem. Yeah, you really need somebody who can work well with the actual elected members of the board to say, this is what we want you to do or not do. Because, hey, if the board is really gung-ho and wants to be crazy about stuff, then I guess that's what the people voted for. But if you're a little more normal, like me, at least I like to think I am, you encourage the property management company to not go nuts and maybe just send out the letters with a light warning before you actually start finding people and doing anything else.
Now, I think I have said this to you before. Joe joined us a couple of weeks ago when we did our multi-part series on the REINS Act. Maybe I didn't say this to you. I've said this to other folks at PLF. Because I have incredible, like there are people who know that I envy them. Nick Gillespie at Reason, knows this, Matt Welch at Reason as well. But, every time I talk to my colleagues at PLF, your colleagues, I'm not going to call them rivals, but your colleagues at IJ, the Institute for Justice,
yes.
I have a tremendous amount of envy. I never had the patience to finally go and get my law degree. But if I did, working at a place like PLF, or IJ is where I would want to be, because you guys are doing the practice of law that is most worthwhile. Talk about what PLF is up to and talk about this new initiative, because I'm so thrilled for you guys. You made as we're recording this, I heard Joe give a presentation at a meeting yesterday about this. Talk about the new initiative, sort of the realignment, I suppose it is. I mean, you guys are rejiggering the way you guys are doing things. Talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, obviously we are a law firm first, right? That's what we've
Yep.
been for over 50 years. But then we have a lot of other elements of it as well. So we have the litigation department. We also have my department. We do legal policy. So we're the ones going up on the Hill and talking to folks in the White House, the agencies, wherever it might be, trying to get things done. We also have that same model, but for the state level as well. So we're going to a number of states and we keep growing that team over and over. We also have constitutional scholarship that does a lot of the research and like legal writing. So they're the ones writing the law review type articles and figuring out where is the law headed and what should judges be looking at and what should they be considering. We also do qualitative research as well. So we're people are going in and qualitative and quantitative research, digging into some of these issues when it comes to what's actually happening in the law, what's happening with things like the CRA and other issues. How often is it being used, and why is it being used? And then ultimately, what we try to do is bring it all back to the practice groups that we have. So we have the separation of powers group. That's pretty self-explanatory. Property rights, pretty clear. Equality and opportunity, where we work on issues like some of these DEI issues that have come up, admissions into high schools like Thomas Jefferson High School up here in Northern Virginia, and how that was handled. But then also opportunity issues when it comes to occupational licensing and other issues. The other one that is the new one that you mentioned is our newest group, the environment and natural resources. So we've obviously been doing a lot of this type of work for a very long time. So it's not really all that new that we're doing this.
Right.
But the part that we're kind of making new of it is that it's a new group dedicated specifically to that, and that we're focusing on the issues regarding in the environment and how it plays into things like the Endangered Species Act, the Clean Water Act, other issues that we've been litigating for a long time, but as well as natural resources, which we've always sort of tangentially touched on, but essentially we're really digging in. So we have cases regarding timber production in Alaska. We're going to start looking at more cases of what things under NEPA, which is essentially a permitting law, and what things are being stopped because of NEPA and where we can challenge NEPA in other places. So really going after the issue when it comes to energy production and natural resources that really productively using our land where we can, while also still respecting a lot of the federal land for other purposes. We're not saying bulldoze national parks here. We're saying,
well, no, but I mean, a lot of folks don't recognize there was another presentation yesterday, somebody talking about this. Obviously, these land use issues are things that I've worked on for many, many years. I don't know if you know this. So my very first job in DC, I was the reader for a blind environmental attorney. Specialty was property rights issues. It's how I first became aware of PLF. He had run Mountain States Legal Foundation before coming to DC in the 80s. And I knew PLF when it was literally just a small couple of people out in California. I watched them when they made their first sort of foray into Florida. But I had a conversation with a member of Congress. This is probably 25 years ago. I was at CEI. And I said, well, you do understand that the reason why the Department of Agriculture is in charge of the U.S. Forest Service is because Forest Service lands are supposed to be managed for timber production, for an agricultural use. And she looked at me like she'd never, nobody, and I shouldn't say this, nobody thinks about it in that way, right? Nobody, so you have national parks and national recreation areas, but then you've got these other lands that are managed for other things. There are reasons for this. I mean, one of the problem that comes in, and I'm sorry, Joe, let me sort of go here, jump around a little bit, is when you get the politicians who want to change that, who don't want to recognize this or want to inject their perspective. So are you familiar at all with the natural asset companies issue that came into play during the Biden administration?
No, I'm not.
So this was an idea where for BLM lands, like grazing lands, to allow big hedge funds to assign an economic value to air sheds and view sheds and things that, so that they could then turn around and bid on grazing lands in competition with the things. It was a way of locking it up by creating these artificial values. I mean, listen, as far as we want to go down the road of making it clear that there are reasons why these are being used in this way or assigned in these ways, the other side is trying to find ways to lock everything up, aren't they?
Right, exactly. And that's one of the biggest things that we're fighting is, for example, in this case that we have in Alaska, what we're asking for them to do is actually just go back to an Obama era management plan, not a new one that they put in place in the last couple of years, saying that essentially you can't do any hardwood harvesting whatsoever in the way they draw the numbers. Now, I mean, ideally, we'd like to go further back, but just as a matter of law, we think they've overstepped what was done during the Obama administration, and they overexpanded it when they already had a management plan in place, and then essentially amended it with a new one saying, we're actually not going to follow it, and we're not going to allow any hardwood harvesting, which is going to be a real problem because as we talk about trying to add that production here in the U.S., it's just simply not going to occur if we don't actually alleviate some of these problems that the last administration and past administrations have put in place that are completely unnecessary.
Joe, is some of this a counterweight to the situation that we have when there are left-leaning administrations in power and environmental groups will turn around? The administration knows that through the regular regulatory process, they can't get whatever they want to do in place. So instead, what they do is they have an outside group sue the agency, and then they have a settlement. Is some of this designed to counteract that idea, to sort of deal with situations where the left has hijacked the process in that way?
Yeah, I think to some degree that's a good way to put it. I mean, we are trying to find ways in which, we're clearly right on the law, right? And then we also have the reflection of that. A lot of these policies are probably reflecting what we're seeing in executive orders from the president, right?
Right.
Such as on timber production. I mean, it's such an easy one to talk about because it's so blatantly obvious of where this should be heading. So the fact that we're trying to pursue this with this administration to say, look, we're right on the law, we're right on policy. This is something that you guys should be working with us on, and really come to the same conclusion that we do. And, there are cases where there may be interveners and things like that. But if that means we will argue with the government, then we'll argue with the government. If they work, great. So that's what we're going to do.
Are you guys filing comments too? Or are you, I know you're lobbying. And the reason why I ask is, again, to be very parochial, and I will say craven, for my own benefit here. You're working on permitting issues. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has this nationwide permit procedure going on. Are you guys filing comments on this?
Filing comments on that. Yeah.
And can I get a peek at those comments to
yes.
gauge off of my own?
I'll have to see what stage we're at. But we're going after that. We're doing any proposed rulemaking we're trying to comment on. We're trying to get in there and talk to folks and say, hey, here's a good idea on X, Y, and Z issue, and see if they're willing to move on them. Let
me ask you. It's so funny because I just had a conversation. I don't know in terms of the order of these things as they're coming out. Ike Brannon, who was with the Jack Kemp Foundation, he's got a very interesting perspective. He does a lot of work with our friends at Cato's Regulation Magazine, and he is rather Eeyore-ish about the idea of gaining economic benefit from regulatory reform. He doesn't think there's a lot that can be done by looking backwards. I am inclined to disagree with this. He thinks obviously there's a lot of economic gain to be looked at prospectively, and I think that's true, right? If you don't add burden, there is both direct economic benefit and regained opportunity cost. Where do you come down in this? I mean, as far as looking back, his thesis is, I don't want to overstate this. His thesis is very simple. You have a regulation out there, command you to engage in a particular practice, command you to engage in some kind of capital expenditure. Once you've already made that capital expenditure, or once you've already changed your process, there's not a lot of benefit to be gained to revert to something else. But obviously you guys are talking about this in things like timber. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, so I think there is a lot to gain. I mean, it's all in degrees, right? So with some of these things, if the process starts going, it's going to be a lot harder for somebody to reverse that. Like if there's a public land order or something like that, where it gets reversed by the current administration. Yes, a future administration can turn it back the other way again. But then we've got a lot of production going. Those are harder cases for them to reverse on, saying we're going to now essentially shut down some timber company from doing something productive, right? I mean, they're just not going to do that. I guess they could, but it's going to be a lot harder for them to do that. And in general, I think it's part of the same conversation we had early on with Doge saying, well, all they're doing is cutting employees. The employees are the smallest part of the budget, but it's what they're doing, right? It's sort of the fact that they're pushing on these initiatives. They're doing these things that are costly to businesses and costly to individuals. And you're going to see savings in the fact that you're not going to, hopefully, not having to hire a lot of lawyers like us and other people that will actually charge you unlike we do. Right. You're going to save a lot of money for people not having to deal with this compliance issues.
And let's add to this the fact that the Doge part of it, dealing with the structure of government and these agencies, that hasn't precluded, and in fact was not a substitute for basically every agency is engaged in some kind of massive request for information on regulatory reform. I mean, that's huge. Yeah. Let me shift gears a little bit here, because your work with the Due Process Institute. And again, your work on criminal justice reform. So one of the things I've been advocating on is, and I have a piece that literally, as we're recording this, just went up on AI and paperwork reduction, because I think that there's huge benefits to be gained there. Was at an event that the George Washington University Reg Studies Center put on regarding AI and regulation. And the first speaker out of the box was a commissioner on the Commodities Futures Trading Commission. And instead of talking about how AI can give us better regulations and help us with compliance, she chose to spend her time talking about using AI as a surveillance and enforcement tool. This is disturbing to me. I suspect it would be disturbing to you. Talk about that.
Yeah, actually, and I can kind of pull an example from PLF as well. So
Please.
We had a case from Townstone Financial. So this is a guy who ran a small mortgage company, and the consumer product, not CFPB. I'm going to get all my acronyms wrong.
Consumer Financial Protection Bureau.
Yes, thank you. I almost said the CPSC.
Too many of them, yes.
Yeah, too many of them. That's the big point.
You could have just said the CCCP, and we would have been all set.
It also covers it, right? Exactly. So they went after him, saying that he might have had bias in his lending, and therefore could have discouraged certain lenders from lending from him. How did they get to that conclusion? Well, he had a radio show and a podcast.
Yeah.
And on his radio show and podcast, he talked about things about how there is a lot of crime in Chicago, and that's where he was based out of. And because he said that, they went after him, saying that you could have discouraged minority lenders from lending with you. But our question was, how did they find this guy's podcast?
Right.
He jokes. He says, I think my mother and 5 other people were listening.
Wow. Yeah.
How did they find this? Well, when the current administration took over, they went in there and they figured it out. He was targeted because he was in the lower quartile of people for minority lending. They figured out he was a small business, and then they figured out he had a radio show. So what did they do? They used an audio listening program to go through his podcast and find things that they thought might have been problematic in the podcast. And that's how they wound up going forward with him.
Which, by the way, I think would have massive First Amendment implications as well. It's funny you say that, because when I was doing radio in Baltimore, I got a complaint from my program director about something I said about a member of Congress. And they had apparently sent him a transcription. And I said, wait a minute, you're telling me that this member of Congress's office is transcribing my show? I mean, that was really disturbing to me. I mean, okay. I mean, on the one hand, some of it was flattering, but on the other hand, right. You talk about the surveillance state that's out there. I mean, Lord knows I transcribe all of the interviews I do here, and I use that stuff. But that is really disturbing to me.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate. And, they actually went forward from the CFPB saying they wanted to reverse the settlement that was done with our client, saying that there was some real it's not wrongdoing, it's not the right word, but there was something that was not quite right here. Unfortunately, the judge rejected it, saying that the public would lose trust in the institution, which I think, frankly, is the opposite of what they were saying. They're saying that we found that there was wrongdoing, and therefore we should make sure there's still trust in the institution. So
that's the thing, right? I mean, the way you restore trust in institutions is by transparency and accountability, isn't it?
Right, exactly. And unfortunately, the judge disagreed with that. So it remains to be seen where we're going to take that thing. But that's one of the issues that, and they actually just had a hearing on the Hill not too long ago talking about some of the bad behavior from CFPB over the last few years. But frankly, it's part of the bureaucracy. I mean, the case originally started under Trump 1. Wow. So, I mean, it doesn't really matter. And it's something we talk about a lot at PLF, the idea of separation of powers, but also the fact that each branch should actually be able to control itself.
Right.
And that's what we keep seeing down in the courts, and what the Supreme Court just okayed the other day of, the president actually is able to cut the Department of Education because those are his employees. Right.
It's so the president, right. It's one of these things where the president has powers, and ultimately the president is the head of the executive branch. He should not be delegating that power to the auto pen, which we don't have to talk about if you don't want to talk about. But I mean, but that's just it, right? There's a reason why Paul Verkyle, who was the the chairman of the Administrative Conference of the United States, it was President William and Mary when I was an undergraduate, and taught a class on the bureaucracy, talking about it as the fourth branch of government. And so, we're talking about, we've been warned about this for many, many years. I mean, that's what makes the issue of DOGE so important, and the other regulatory issues, is recognizing that the bureaucracy is not separate from the administration, is it?
No, it's not. And it was a really bizarre argument we had seen. I could be wrong, so don't quote me on this exactly,
Please.
But I believe it was the ACLU saying that you have the civil service to keep a check on the executive branch. Except they are the executive branch. So it's nonsensical. There's no point to what they're
Folks,
saying.
I'm holding my head in my hands as I listen to this. I mean, it really is. It's so funny because I got into this with a guy on X. Never a good thing. I don't recommend it. I don't do it anymore. I very rarely engage in these kinds of arguments here, or on social media. But you got into it over this issue of this guy not trusting the civil servants trusting political appointees, but not anyway. It was a whole thing where it didn't make any sense in terms of how he was placing his trust. It was this kind of a nonsensical argument. Let me ask you this. So PLF did not have any cases in the high court this term, right?
No, we did not. No.
But you guys were watching. Lots of high points, obviously. Anything that stands out for you guys in terms of what was decided this year?
I think for us, there's one that we were watching just from particularly a law firm perspective of what was going to happen on the issue of the nationwide injunctions. And look, we've tried to get those too, right? But I think ultimately where they've landed makes a lot of good sense. The fact that the court says you can't have these district courts that are putting these things out for everybody in the country. You want to have consistency, of course, but you don't want to have it so that a lower judge is going to be handling these things and essentially stopping the priorities of one of the branches of government. It just doesn't make a ton of sense. Now, the good news for that, one, because I think that was overreached by some of the lower court judges, so that's the obvious good news. But I think the other good news is that this will force the issues to get to the Supreme Court sooner, and it'll force them to take more of these issues on. Because you suddenly have a few lower courts saying, okay, well, in our district we have it, in another one, maybe they rule differently. You're going to have a lot more circuit splits just sort of at the initial stages. And, both parties in those suits are going to want to appeal it all the way up. And we've seen a couple of them already come up to them again. I think we're going to see more coming up about some of these classes that are getting certified very sloppily, which is exactly what Justice Alito warned about, saying, look, we're saying you can do it this way. That's fine. It's reasonable, but you got to actually do it under the rules of federal procedure and civil procedure. And, what's going to happen is there's some judges who are just not going to respect that, and they're going to let it go pretty quickly to be certified as a class very quickly. And they're going to have to litigate that issue most likely next term. I will not be surprised to see it come up yet again and figure out, hey, you actually have to follow the rules. And I don't know how you say it besides we really mean it, but they're going to have to do something about it. So they'll have to get creative. They'll have to do something.
So I know part of this new strategy or this realignment at PLF is in no small measure to also deal with what's happening in the executive branch in the post-Chevron world, post-Lober-Bright and Relentless. Let's talk about, we are now a year past it. There's a lot going on, and we just had a district court decision in the remanded, I guess we would call it the remanded Relentless case. I don't know if you can talk about that, but where do things stand? What's your view of the landscape in the post-Chevron world? Our good friend Veronique DeRougy at Mercatus was very concerned about us not having a grasp as to what to do next. But where are things now?
Yeah, so it's interesting, right? I mean, I always like to say, particularly on the policy side of things, the Supreme Court doesn't change the law. They don't overrule anything, right? They just decided in a single case. If you really want to overrule the law, you have to have legislatures do that, right? But now, ideally, you don't have to keep fighting it out in court because the lower court will say, look, this is what the Supreme Court said. Now, that's also not guaranteed, per what I was just mentioning, about the lower court's not always following exactly what you think they heard from the Supreme Court. So that's always an issue. But in issues like in the Relentless case, it's a two-pronged question. It's one, is the government still going to fight on this, which unfortunately they still are, which I think is a problem, because I don't see the point of them keeping this on the books in the first place and the way it's been interpreted. I think there's a very strong argument that it was interpreted wrongly to accept their argument for why they need to have the monitors on the ships, right? Just as a objective.
And just folks, so you understand this, the idea underlying this was whether or not the National Marine Fisheries Service not only had the power to put these observers on these boats, but then to also force the companies to pay for these observers on their boats, which I find insane on so many levels. But then again, I'm someone who believes that there's a takings case to be made by the fact that you buy a mailbox and you have all of this space in the mailbox that that is not yours, that is the sole domain of the federal government. But that's just me. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jim.
But no, I mean, that is a big issue. I mean, I think as a property rights taking issue, I know we had litigated a case a number of years ago that talked about that. And if government allows somebody to get into your property for some purpose, well, isn't that a taking? Don't you need to be compensated for it? And this is essentially them doing the exact opposite of that. So, I mean, on the merits, I think it's a very strong case, both in Relentless and Loper Bright, that they should just toss them. But yeah, I mean, in the end, when it comes back to what actually Loper Bright decided, all they said was, well, a judge can just hear both sides equally, not just defer to the one side. So there are still going to be cases where the litigant is just wrong. I mean, like, oh, yeah, we're going to hear you both equally. And yeah, the government's right. Like, you guys are interpreting it wrong. They can do the thing that they said they can do. And yeah, again, we may oppose it on other grounds, but for that purpose, that's the way it's going to shake out in a lot of cases.
That's an important distinction to be made, right? It is this idea of for 40 years, it was automatic deference to what the agency's interpretation was, in very few exceptions. And obviously, with West Virginia v. EPA, they came right up close to overturning Chevron and didn't. But there's still the possibility of deference being accorded. It's just not automatic anymore. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, that's correct. And yeah, and really wouldn't even be considered deference in a lot of ways. It would just be considered them taking the argument and just saying, yeah, your argument is correct. And then that's that. And again, it's also only coming up when there's actually a dispute over how it's interpreted. Sure. If it's pretty clear and the judge just interprets it as being clear, then who cares what either side says? The judge has decided this is what it means. So that's part of the argument too, is that, and why, it wasn't this. It was a major deal for the litigants, but not like end of the world for the administrative state. It was not the end of the administrative state by any means, because they're still going to be right on a bunch of stuff. And if we let them keep doing this rulemaking and regulating that goes beyond the statute, well, that's another problem that Congress has to deal with, right? So that's still the bigger problem at hand. You're
spending a lot of time up on the Hill. We had a conversation just the other day with Harriet Hageman, who's got this Article 1 effort as part of the Republican Study Committee. I mean, are you buoyed by the greater interest in the issue of separation of powers and the greater interest in regulatory impacts? Is Congress finally going to take their job of legislating seriously, or are we constantly going to have this push-pull by the part of folks who recognize this and then Congress critters who just don't want to do their job?
Yeah, I mean, that's the hope that folks up there really do get it and understand that they need to be doing it and being more proactive when it comes to how they write the laws as well. You can't just say, and whatever the secretary deems necessary at the end of every sentence, because that's how you wind up with these problems. So you need to be specific. You can specify what the secretary and what the department should be working on or not working on. So there are better ways to write these laws, and that's something they can work on. And then in the meantime, recognizing that they actually need to pass things to get them done. And yeah, is it going to be tough to get things through the Senate? Of course. But, take the tough votes and see what happens. And if it doesn't happen, then there's a record there of who stands for what issues, and let the voters decide how that should land. So,
as someone who grew up in the tri-state area, did you grow up in northern New Jersey or southern New Jersey?
Yeah, North Jersey. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So tri-stater. How did you wind up at William and Mary?
So partially because I think my guidance counselor didn't look at a map. I had said I wanted to be near D.C., and she suggested William and Mary.
Relatively.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's all relative.
As someone who lives in Williamsburg, I wish I were a little closer at times, but
yes, But yeah, so that was part of it because I was interested in D.C. and I don't think they looked at a map, and it just seemed close enough, I guess. But yeah, really enjoyed it and thought it was a good place to be, and love my time there. Had a lot of fun. I was there during the Red Cross controversy.
Yeah.
So
No, I know. You know something, because I was, it was me and sort of Caesar Conda on the outside. I don't know if you know Caesar at all.
Yes, yeah.
So, Caesar was raising a lot of issues about this. For folks who don't understand, so what was that like being a student there as all of this was going on? I mean, oh God, now I can't remember the guy, Gene Nickel, just sort of stepped in it in the biggest way. But that wasn't the only thing. I mean, that was sort of the cross that broke the camel's back, as it were, because there have been a couple of other things that he'd done. What was it like, sort of, as you guys, was it your student newspaper that sort of broke the issue?
Yeah, so actually, the main newspaper, the Flat Hat, broke the issue, but we were the ones that said, this is kind of a big deal, and just briefly for the audience, there's William & Mary is now a public school, but for 300 years or so had been a private religious school. Yeah. And about 100 years prior, now I guess 120 years prior, they had been given a cross by the local Anglican church to put on their altar in the chapel in the Wren building. Yes. And it sat out there, most of the time. If somebody had an event where they wanted it put away, they would just ask, and somebody would put on nice gloves and they'd put it away, and then they bring it back out again, because it's an altar in a chapel. But the president of William & Mary, Gene Nickel, said that it was not inclusive. So this is 2005, 6. Yeah. This is ahead of all the madness on this, but campuses are always ahead of the curve on the crazy. They said this was not inclusive enough. It made some people feel uncomfortable. So therefore, by default, we will put it in the closet, and you could ask for it to come out. Sure. So needless to say, we made a big stink about it on campus. We worked with some other folks on the outside, including Vince Haley, who's actually up at the White House now, who's also a William & Mary alum. I don't think I realized that. See, there you go. Yeah. So another guy we worked with quite a bit, and we had access to the entire alumni email list. And so you probably got the email signed by me back in 2006 saying that we had a real issue with this. And then, from there, it kind of spiraled out of control. And ultimately, I mean, there's a few other things that happened where the president of William & Mary had kind of stepped out of bounds. But particularly, one of the things that our paper found out and what we reported on and broke the story on was the fact that they had announced that they hit this big fundraising goal when they had, in fact, not, because money had been pulled back over the controversy. So once those emails, we did a Freedom of Information Act request. Sure. We knew the emails were there. It was not a phishing expedition. We had sources and figured out the email existed. It was an email from the former president, Tim Sullivan, saying that the money was not going to be there. And it was a $12 million donation that got pulled. So they fell short of their $500 million goal. And of course, they wanted to make it seem as though nothing has changed. All is well. We hit our fundraising goal. This is great. But they actually had not. Wow. So we broke that. A few other things as well, how things were being handled on campus regarding other free speech issues and funding of certain speakers. So in the end, they did not renew his contract, and he resigned, which caused all these campus protests. And I got my dorm room vandalized. No! And it was a lot of fun. Yes.
Well, where were you living? Got to ask, where were you living at the time?
So I was in Harrison, one of those tiny ones right across from DuPont.
Yep. They're now tearing down the Randolph complex, which is crazy.
Yep. Those are jail cells. So
dorms at William & Mary that have been around for 70 plus years that are still there, but yet these that were built in the 90s or late 80s and early 90s are gone. And you were a student government nerd like me, which is crazy. So that of course it was a student association when I was there. Do you find? Let me ask you this. Mm-hmm. Because you're, as I said, you're not the first William & Mary alumnus I've had on the show. Do you find that you're still in close contact with your William & Mary friends? I mean, because I'm still close to the folks that I did student government with, and some of the folks that I did college radio with, especially the ones who've come to DC afterwards, which is kind of crazy. I mean, what are your thoughts here about that sort of vibrant alumni network?
Yeah, no, it's pretty vibrant. And it's mostly actually with the newspaper people and the folks that were doing the politics and stuff like that. So not so much your freshman roommate kind of thing. No. He's a nice guy, but I don't talk to him all that much. Yeah. But definitely more of sort of the organizations. A lot of folks I still work with. And again, like you said, run into it up on the Hill and elsewhere. So
my roommate sophomore year came out of essentially like Episcopalian royalty in Richmond. and was was the first person who told me that no matter how long I lived in Virginia, I would never be a Virginian, which is fine, But it's funny because I was raised as a cultural Jew and a cultural Jewish environment in New York. And now my sophomore year roommate is a Reformed rabbi, living. I'm not sure he may be in Illinois now. He was in Atlanta for a while. Maybe he's in Atlanta. I don't know, but it's, but I considered that a bit of a victory. So it's good to keep in touch with any faculty members.
No, actually, I have not really had much contact with a lot of them. But yeah,
I'm still very much in touch. For a long time, I was helping Ron Rappaport do surveying of conservative groups, and of course, John McGlennon is a local politician. Anyway, this is completely inside baseball. But I was having lunch with. You'll appreciate this if you remember anything about Ron Rappaport. Ron Rappaport, folks, is one of the great nationwide experts on third-party movements.
Yeah.
But he's also the quintessential absent-minded professor, and I love him to death. So Ron and I are meeting for lunch in Williamsburg. I show up at the restaurant, and John McGlennon is there sitting with somebody, and he goes to Rappaport. He says, "Oh, you're early for our lunch." Rappaport had completely forgotten that he was supposed to be having lunch with McGlennon there, so the four of us wanted that.
That's perfect.
So listen, as I said, so real quick before I let you go, you do all this stuff. We've talked about William and Mary. I do like to ask my guests about their outside interests. What are you doing when you're not doing policy work, when you're not up on the Hill, when you're not, practicing the law or the advocacy side of things? What are some of your other outside interests?
So actually, one of the things I just left, I'm still on the board, but I was for the last 4 years president of the Hillsborough Charter Academy.
Yes.
Which is one of the charter schools out in Loudoun County. Unfortunately, in Virginia, there's only 7 charter schools because it's almost impossible to get one certified. Yes. 2 are in Loudoun, oddly enough.
Sure. Weird. Okay.
Yeah, so I'm paraphrasing it a bit, but essentially the way you can start a charter school in Virginia is, well, first of all, you need the approval of the locals, which is very difficult in a lot of cases. But even before that, you need to be either in an economically disadvantaged area. There's another term of art. It's not exactly that, but that's essentially what they're getting at. Or it has to be a converted public school. So the 2 in Loudoun were actually both schools, both in Hillsborough and Middleburg, that they had threatened to close because of low enrollment and the way they were realigning the district, essentially to be able to close them because they were very old buildings that they didn't want to keep up anymore. So the parents there, was before my time, but the parents in both of them, just over 10 years ago, said, well, we want to keep a local neighborhood school open. And the board at the time leaned a little more on the Republican side and said, you know what, we'll let you keep it open if you turn it into a charter.
There you go.
And they did it. So Hillsborough Charter Academy has now been operating for 10 years. We've had just awesome. It's a STEAM base, so it's STEM plus arts.
Sure.
That's the
okay.
But a lot of good work on that. We do a lot of things on aviation. Last year, they were one of the only 9 schools that through ham radio were talking to the folks stuck up on the space station.
Wow. Amazing.
So doing stuff like that.
It's actually really funny. Hold on for a second. A guy I went to high school with was pioneering before we had the internet, using ham radio for computers to talk to each other.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Crazy.
That's really great. Yeah. That's one way to do it. Yeah. No. So it's a lot of good work there. So I was the president of the board, still on the board now for another year. And so that took a lot of time. We had to get the charter renewed every 5 years. You have to get it renewed. So that took a lot. And really now just dealing with the county to say, look, this is an old building, and you can't just say, we'll see if it collapses. We're renting it from you. So what are we going to do about it? And as you see these other major projects coming up, they're building a new high school for $225 million.
Right.
The budget overall is, I think we hit $2 billion this year, or just under. The good news for us though is that as they continue to raise it, and we're pretty frugal with what we do, we get the average per pupil. What they put out. Essentially, you take the budget, you divide it by the number of expected students, and then they take a 5% administrative fee, and then we get what's left after that.
Wow.
But the per pupil in Loudoun County is $23,000 per pupil.
Wow.
So you have a school of only 144 kids that has a budget of over $3 million. So
there you go.
It's very, if you're good about these things and you can work with it, you can do a lot of good, and our scores are consistently very high at the school, so we're very proud of it. So that's my big passion outside of work. So,
well, how do folks find out more about the good work you're doing, the work you're doing at the Pacific Legal Foundation?
Yeah, pacificlegal.org is the way to find it. Hillsboroughcharter.org, if people are interested in that. But pacificlegal.org. I'm on Twitter as well, AVG Joe LE, average Joe LE. Please, anybody wants to tune into what we're doing, please let us know. And we're always happy to help. And if you have a case, you think you can fight the government on something, definitely reach out through our website and we will have a chat.
Pacificlegal.org. Joe Luppino-Esposito, hark upon the gale, my friend.
Yes.
There you go. This has been yet another episode of the Federal Newswire's Lunch Hour podcast. Please go and check us out on YouTube, on the many podcast platforms that are out there. Hit the subscribe button. Let your friends and family members know. Oh, and follow us on X at Lunch Hour Pod. I'm your host, Andrew Langer. I want to thank our guest again. Enjoy the rest of your lunch.
This has been the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour podcast, hosted by Andrew Langer. Check out the Federal Newswire's family of websites, as well as their social media stream.